I think that eventually truth frees you, Shoma. It might be painful at that point, but eventually, it's liberating. So I just wish a lot more people were honest with their kids, because their kids know what's going down.
Hi, I'm Shoma Chaudhury. Thanks for watching Enquiry. And if you like these interviews, do press the subscribe button on the channel and the bell icon for notifications. Now, the focus of our show today is an intimate portrait of a woman as an artist. How a woman negotiates money, power, sex, love, art, society, marriage is always a very complex thing. A wonderful new show on Netflix, Bombay Begums, captures many nuances of that negotiation. Our speaker today on the show is a key character in the series, and her personal life is as complex as the one she plays on screen. She was a star at 17, she's lived through a divorce, alcoholism, and after almost 21 years off screen, she's back with a very, very powerful role. Pooja Bhatt as Rani mesmerizes, and as she says, there's nothing more powerful than a woman who has rebuilt herself. So we'll be speaking to her today about the exterior and interior truths of her heartland. I absolutely loved the way you performed, Pooja. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, and thank you for watching it. Your opinion matters, Shoma, so I'm truly gratified. Thank you.
So, Pooja, you play such a powerful character in Bombay Begums, and yet she has a very, vulnerable interior life, seeking love. In fact, one of the most touching moments for me was when she's utterly vulnerable and she tells Sir Rahul Bose's character that I thought you loved me, and the sheer bewilderment and the seeking, the yearning. So I really wanted to explore your own life through the prism of this role that you've played. You were like that, a high-performing professional woman, and then you kind of disappeared into your own personal life for many years. So what made you, if you were describing yourself as a film character, how would you describe yourself? Who are you? Who were you? What are your highs and lows?
Well, I think that what's always seen me through, Shoma, has been my vulnerability. The fact that, I've been able to kind of put my wounds out there, because I think that, when you try to cover it up, it actually ends up doing you a lot more harm. So I've always had this ability to be able to air my wounds. And I think that that's when the healing has happened in a very organic manner, where one has been able to bounce back each time, because you've just been able to hold your pain up to light and not try to kind of bury it deep inside, which we are prone to do, because then that manifests in very, very bizarre ways and actually ends up becoming very toxic for oneself internally. So life has been a roller coaster in many ways. I became an actor accidentally at 17. And before I knew it, I was a star. And while I was privileged to have been launched through a film like Daddy and had some meaty roles, the general feeling was that when you're a heroine and if you're a star, you need to be seen and not heard. That's something that did not go down well with me, because at the end of the day, the audience must be able to even get a glimpse into your heartland, on and off screen. That's what I believe. And I was told that it won't do you very well. You won't get very far ahead. Learn to keep your opinions to yourself. Of course, I didn't take that advice, and it got me into trouble sometimes. But I think that there was a connect with people randomly across the world who I still meet 25 years later, and they say, you know what, we really loved reading your interviews because we felt that we could hear ourselves, or we could see ourselves in your angst or in your aspirations. And for me, that's very gratifying as a woman. Production happened to me at a time when my self-esteem personally was quite low. And when I mean self-esteem was low, I wasn't somebody who wanted to just wait around for the right role to come my way. And depending on whether the film was a hit or a flop, you take yourself seriously based on the outcome. Because if there was work that I did that I didn't truly feel gratified with, it didn't matter to me how it was kind of consumed by the world. Yet if there was work that I did that I felt that I had grown with, even if it was a box office dud, I felt gratified to a large extent. So I said, am I going to be sitting around and waiting? or am I going to be in charge of my destiny? And then the script of Tamanna happened to me, and I said, let me put my money where my mouth is and let me produce this. I tasted blood. I felt that, okay, now I was creating something from scratch. I was collaborating with people. I was making something happen. I felt very strongly about the theme. Female infanticide is something. And then, of course, I was told that you have no business being a filmmaker, because it was a big boys club, and I was told that you have youth on your side. Why do you want to squander that? Do film for another 10 years. And जब आपको heroine के roles नहीं मिल रहे हैं, तब production के बारे में सोचिए आप. So I said, no, I want it now. And I'm going to learn this and I'm going to master it. I was still looked upon as an art filmmaker, a sensitive filmmaker. Then I gave them a blockbuster in the form of Jism, where a woman actually says, you know, ye jism pyar karna nahi janta, janta hai to sirf bhook. That just drove people crazy, that how could a woman kind of state that? It would have been okay if a man stated that. So that kind of really opened the Pandora's box in many ways. And then things played out, flops, hits, blah, blah, blah. Got married, was in a marriage for 10 years, woke up achingly lonely at the end of 10 years and realized that there has to be more than this. Didn't want to blame the person for my inner kind of wasteland. So I decided at that point to just kind of leave. And it was not for somebody else, it was for me. It was to claim that woman that I had lost somewhere. And I think that, you know, we forget our inherent femininity, our inherent kind of voice that's there in us, because we become responsible producers or wives or mothers in that sense, and we bury a large part of ourselves. And I was 40. I said it's now or never. So I just decided to change my narrative and meandered for a while. Realized that I was drinking very heavily. You wouldn't know at 5:30 in the morning whether I'd just woken up or I was going to bed, because my tweets had every kind of, you know, comma and exclamation mark in place. But I was a functional alcoholic. And the irony of life is that at 17, I do a film where I wean my father off alcohol. At 45, I have to look deep in the mirror and realize that I have a problem myself. And I decided to acknowledge that. I decided to put it out there in the world, because I felt that the stigma of addiction and recovery, needs to go. And even addiction cannot be a mard ki jagir in that sense. I mean, why are men only allowed to have these failings and then come back from the dead, as they say? And that changed my life, Shoma. And coming to terms with that, staring my demons straight in the eye, realizing that there was a vacuum in my heart that I first filled with relationships. And then I tried to fill with alcohol. And alcohol, more often than not, never let you down. You know, relationships tended to do that. The bottle didn't lie. It delivered each time. It's just that it started getting toxic for me emotionally. And that deciding to just give it up actually changed the entire course of my life. And that was a long, long, long answer.
No, I'm glad. It's a very, very, very lived life, so it deserves a long answer. But you lived such a packed life. It was so, iconoclastic. It was full of creativity. You come from an extremely unconventional family. Your father epitomizes the untidy, large, creative mind, which nowadays most stars are so practiced. The artist is so constructed. He's part of an earlier era of wild abandon. But I'd like to explore what that was like for you. He was a pathfinder, but he was also deeply alcoholic. He had many affairs. He's been public about his affair even before he left your mother for Sony. His relationship with Parveen Bhabhi. In fact, he said it was the big narrative that shaped his life. I was talking to him, I'd explore his impulses, but what impact did it have to have a father like him for you as a daughter? If you look back very honestly, what was that experience?
Well, frankly, I mean, that's the father that I was accorded by life, and he has been an extremely fair man to both me, my mother, to Sony, to I think everybody who comes into his life. I mean, there were no lies ever. I never had to find out the truth about my life or my father's life or my mother's life from a film magazine. I didn't have to have somebody whisper it in the playground. when my father met Sony and when he decided that he was going to marry her, because that's the kind of man he is. He's never had casual encounters. He's not a casual person. He met Parveen Bhabhi, he moved out of the house. Unfortunately, her life played out the way it did. And it was UG Krishnamurthy who actually told him at that point that, you need to decide whether you want to go down with her or you want to be able to get hold of your life. And ironically, it was Parveen who introduced my father to UG. Parveen actually held that against UG for a long time and believed that he was the architect of the destruction of their relationship. Post that, my parents got back together. My brother was conceived and born. And a few years later, he met Sony. And like I said earlier, my father's not a casual man. He met Sony, he fell in love with her, he married her. And when he decided to marry her and be with her, I was fairly young. He woke me up in the middle of the night and he told me that I want you to know before anybody else knows that I've met this lady and I am going to be, spending my life with her. And people ask me, oh, that must have been very traumatic. I think it would have been more traumatic to hear this from somebody else and not your own father. And I believe very strongly that as children, it's very important sometimes to parent your parents. If I had kind of looked at it only from my perspective and said that, oh my God, what are my, classmates going to think? What are the people in the building going to think? We're the only family where there's going to be a divorce. So I think that when you look at your parents and you expect them to understand your choices, you need to understand their choices as well. And as a child growing up in a home, when you know inherently that there is a shift in two people's equation, your parents, a child can sense that. They're going to see that there seems to be a communication gap, that this is a loveless marriage. And you rather have two people acknowledge that a relationship is dead and move on and have some semblance of respect and evolvement in that relationship than kind of just flog a dead horse. So I think that my parents share an extremely special equation. Not many people know this, but Ashiki, the love story, was actually based on my parents' love story and their entire courtship. So she was this girl like Anu Agarwal in this school, Scottish orphanage it was called. And a lot of Anglo-Indians, lived and studied there. And he lived in a building right across and he saw her, fell in love with her, love at first sight, and jumped the wall to meet her, got caught. My grandmother was summoned. And my grandmother, a very tough Armenian, Irish, Anglo-Indian, looked at him and said, if you're old enough to jump a wall to meet my daughter, then you're old enough to support her. And he did that. And all these years later, my father is now 72. He met her when he was 17. They still have the most pure, most respectful, most amazing equation because, yes, they've had their ups and downs. Yes, they've kind of, gone through phases where they possibly not felt very warm towards each other. But he held her hand when she was all of 16 and he has never let go. And that's the kind of man that my father is. When he holds your hand, when he's there for you, when he has your back, no matter what the world says, he will continue to have your back. And these are attributes that I kind of as a daughter truly applaud. So I think that I've never been a person sitting in the wings. I've been somebody who's been there in the arena with my parents. I've been part of their decision making with regards to the course of their life. And I was never talked down to. I was never treated like a child who would not understand because this was a grown-up issue. My mind was respected. My emotional quotient was respected. I was never presumed that, oh, this is not a conversation that you're meant to have in front of a child because we're talking about a marriage ending. That is a conversation you must have in front of a child because the child's life kind of gets affected or not affected by that. But I think that eventually truth frees you, Shoma. It might be painful at that point, but eventually, it's liberating. So I just wish a lot more people were honest with their kids because their kids know what's going down. Yeah. You can't lie to them, and especially not today. Children are so much more evolved today because they have so much coming at them. And we were quite foolish in comparison back then. But you looked at the world and you judged your parents by their actions, not their words. So in that sense, I am the woman I am today because my parents respected my mind. They respected my heart. They knew I was an individual. They didn't want me to be clones of them.
I think what you just said, Pooja, one, it's so off the rails in terms of how people normally conduct or assess their relationships. But the fact that you could live a stereotypical life and yet value such deep things, transparency, honesty, respect. And I think that's, again, like you were just saying, that so many people now live in a very fractured emotional landscape. And I think the key thing there is that respect, and when you're not fighting shadows, then you don't fall ill.
I've been asked this. Is that how did it feel? How does it feel to come from a broken home? And I said, my home is not broken. My father might have moved out, but that's a matter of geography. He was there as a parent. He was there as a man who had held that lady Lorraine Bright's hand at the age of 17 for him and 16 for her. And he's still a moral guardian in that sense, not only for me, but for everybody who comes into his life. I mean, everybody who's been touched and everybody who has encountered my father within the film industry, outside of it, have always met me and said that, your father's had a lasting impact on us because he's heard us. He's listened with his heart. He hasn't judged. And you're so lucky to have him in your life. And I said, yes, and he's very lucky to have me in his life because I've heard him with my heart and I haven't judged him. So I remember many years ago telling him once, it's not fair. You're not being fair to me. And he said, really? I want to see what you're going to be like when you're a parent and whether you're going to be as fair to your child as the way your mother and me have been with you. And that got me thinking, and I had to admit that I would possibly not have the gumption to be as expansive as they both were with me, which is why possibly I have dog children and cats and not human children.
Well, I'm going to come to all of those as well. But I just want to explore another strand, Pooja, which you have lived so keenly and, I would imagine with a lot of pain, and which does, impact many other lives. So I want to understand that through you, is this whole phenomenon of alcoholism and addiction. You saw it with your father, and I don't know how much of Daddy parallels your life and whether you really did help him out of his addiction. But having seen the devastation of that and the humiliations of that, how did you fall into it yourself?
My father lived and thrived in times where, alcohol was not looked upon as something that could be that destructive. I mean, I remember growing up in a home where it was full of people. There was Shabana Azmi, there was Smita Patil, there was Kulbhushan Kharbanda, there was Sanjay Dutt, Kumar Gaurav, Sudhir Mishra, Shekhar Kapoor, really bright, alive human beings who would kind of congregate at my home, and the conversations were so alive. I mean, they would share each other's work. They would openly discuss their relationships, whether they were thriving or ending. There was no guards. And I believe that that's what the world is, because I said, here are these people who bleed so openly. I saw how brutal fame could be, upfront, which is why when I was first asked by my father to act, I said, I don't think I can do this. Not because I looked down upon acting, because I realized that fame is not for sissies. Showbiz is not for sissies. You're going to have your heart broken over and over again by the same people who kind of prop you up, and they're going to pull you down, because that's just the nature of the beast. But it was an extremely exciting environment because there was so much of learning. There was, I woke up to, at the age of possibly 13 or 12, to Rimbaud, to kind of, Nietzsche. People sat down with me and explained to me what the lines and the lyrics of Pink Floyd actually meant way before my time. So there was a lot of that phase that really influenced the person that I am. And it was the order of the day. They would kind of sometimes have 3-day binges. They would kind of discuss scripts, drinking for days at end, but it was very productive. They were discussing life. They were discussing divinity. They were discussing death. They were discussing immortality, all the things that people actually very, very alive, very bright minds are obsessed with in that sense. So it was a very fertile ground. And yes, I did realize at a point that alcohol was getting the better of my father, but I had nothing to do with him giving up. It was actually my sister Shaheen when she was born. I remember my father and Sony were living in this tiny apartment in Warsaw, and little Shaheen came home and he picked her up one day. And that child actually turned her face away because of the stench of alcohol on his breath. And that broke his heart. And he said to himself that this is it. I'm not going to touch another drop of alcohol. And it's been 30 plus years. He's walked his talk. He just gave it up and became a completely different man. Of course, he replaced alcoholism with workaholism, but he's a driven individual. And so am I. And I found myself drinking, but I was a social drinker. And I could conduct myself well. But one day, I realized that it was destroying me. And the wake-up call came again from an unusual but not surprising source, my father. He was on his way to the Maldives with Alia and Shaheen and Sony. And we were having a talk via text while he was at the airport. And I ended my marriage at 40. I was about 44, 45 at that time. And we were having this talk and he signed off with, "I love you, kid." And I messaged him back saying, "I love you too, Pops." And then I added that, actually you are the only thing in my life that's truly worth loving. And he sent me a message back that changed my life, Shoma. And it said, "If you love me, then love yourself, because I live in you." And it was not those lines, it was the meaning that I read in those lines. He never once told me don't drink. He never once told me you got to control your alcohol intake. It has to be an inner calling. And I read that message and I didn't know what to do with that. And I messaged him back saying, "I promise you that from today I'm going to be the best me possible." I put the phone down. I went out that night. I drank another half bottle of single malt. Came back home. Woke up the next morning, looked at myself in the mirror. And I said, "Is this how you're going to be the best you?" The answer was a resounding no. And I decided that that was it. It was the 24th of December, Christmas Eve. Christmas is the time that we have always celebrated. Memories of Christmas and Christmas Eve have always been tied to wine and, all of that. I put my phone on silent, sat at home in my little apartment in Bandra with my 4 cats, heard Silent Night wafting in from a window outside, didn't drink. Woke up the next morning feeling like I conquered Mount Everest, and then just stayed off the bottle. It's been 4 years and 3 months now, and I haven't looked back. But I do realize that you're just a breath away, you're a step away from going exactly where you started. So it's every day you got to work on it, So yeah, so that message, that single message changed my life. Though I must say, while it's no different from my father putting me in front of that camera and saying action, but between action and cut, you're on your own. And you're pretty much on your own through sobriety as well. And you just need to be able to constantly churn your insides and overhaul your mind and be able to sit with yourself, to endure yourself without any, crutch is not easy. But it's made me more compassionate towards the world at large. It's made me less selfish. I think I listen more to people, even though I might not agree with them. I understand that there's a human being somewhere who's speaking from a place of fear, ignorance, wherever they're coming from. And it's been deeply cathartic in many ways.
So, just to take you back, Pooja, to the series, of Bombay Begum, there were 5 main characters there, women characters, and all of them in different ways are negotiating love and relationships and the exterior and the interior life, And it's fascinating that this dynamic and tension plays out everywhere. Like you spoke of 2020, the big story there was actually Sushant Singh Rajput, where people just could not reconcile that his exterior life of success and of being talented and gifted could have a interior life where he was struggling. Now, none of us know because, whether it was just a chemical condition or did he have a vacuum in his heart that he was not able to fill. We don't know that. But that's a similar strand playing out even in Bombay Begums, where the exterior is something and the interior is something else. So in your life, Pooja, vis-a-vis the relationship, can you help cast light on just what were you negotiating, what were you seeking as a woman, and how different was it from the way people would have imagined you to be? You were the brash, super successful, a woman who was willing to be photographed naked on a cover with body paint. You were the original iconoclast. And then you subsumed yourself into a marriage where you pretty much disappeared professionally.
Yeah, I mean, even my getting married was controversial. It was kind of, people were rather shocked. And then they were shocked that I remained married for 10 years. And I must be honest here. I think that part of me wanted to keep that marriage working because I wanted to tell myself that I could make a relationship work. I wanted to prove to my naysayers that, look, I am capable of enduring and sustaining something. But there came a phase where, and this is not an attack on the person who I was married to. It had nothing to do with him. I was lonely in that marriage. I felt that my mind, my heart was not being nurtured. I felt that I was somewhere dying creatively. I felt that I had buried the woman in me and I wanted that woman back. And I'm, in a way, a hopeless and a hopeful romantic. No matter where I've been in my life, no matter at what stage, no matter whether I was at the top of my game at 19, whether I was called a has-been at 24, whether I started production, that gave me my self-esteem back, I won national awards, I made hit films. I somewhere believe that life, that last piece of the puzzle would be complete if there was a man to share that journey with. But I think that the most marvelous thing about giving up the bottle was me realizing that there is no difference between a toxic relationship and a substance. Whether it's a bottle of whiskey or whether it's a relationship that you are kind of feeding off to somewhere, fill a vacuum in you, there's no difference. So at this point of my life, I am for the first time enjoying what you call single blessedness, where I'm not looking for gratification from a man, from a bottle of whiskey, or from anybody out there beyond a point. And am I open to love? Of course I'm open to love, but I'm not looking for a solution because there are no solutions. If you look at my father's film Arth, strangely, I remember that time when he was making that end where Shovana finally walks away from even her lover and Kulbhushan Kharbanda with that child. The whole industry went up in arms saying that what kind of an ending is this? Okay, she manages to walk away from her husband, but she's getting the option of love from a wonderful man called Raj Kiran. Why is she not taking that? And I remember him saying then what's the difference? You replace one addiction with another. She has to walk on her own 2 feet. And I think finally I am walking on my own 2 feet. So it's quite liberating. It's not very easy. So I have friends, some of them who have met at 16 and remained married 30 years later. I've met people who've had the courage to look at a marriage at the end of a year and say, hey, this is not working. We made a mistake. Let's end this right now before kids come into the fray. I know people who've been living a lie for 20 years, who have what you call open marriages. So who's to say what is right or wrong for anybody? I just know that for me, this is what is right now. I don't have the space for niceties. I don't have the space for any iota of lie. If somebody can meet me halfway with truth, I don't wish to be rescued. I don't claim to have the tools to rescue somebody. And if there's somebody who I can be silent with, more often than not, I'm open to love. But not because society tells me to.
So what attracted you personally to the Bombay Begum script? There's so much going on. Pick for me some of the themes that really...
I must say, when I got that first email, what grabbed me was the title. Bombay Begums. It was not Bombay Begums, it was Begums, which meant that there was a kind of a array of women and women in different stages of their life. And somehow that's always fascinated me. The world of finance and banking was a great world, but I realized that was just the exterior world that she had set up, but it was actually more about each woman's heartland. And I think the fact that Rani was so complex, vulnerable, weak, manipulative, strong, desperate for success, um, desperate to be loved by her stepchildren, traditional in so many ways, forward in so many ways. I mean, just a bag of contradictions. And I think that all of us really are a bag of contradictions, you know. I think we don't reveal those contradictions to ourselves, forget about the world. So I think to be able to play that, and of course, to be able to play my age, Shoma, to be able to kind of, you know, I used to always joke and say that, you know, I would, of course, I'd act if I get a role that would kind of accommodate my girth and my mirth. And I think that finally there was a role that definitely accommodated both those things. But I think she's also a lot not like me. There are certain things that the character would do that I would never do. But that's what makes it exciting. Which, for example, I mean, that scene where I sit down with Aisha, where I'm feeding her kachoris and I'm trying to get her to change her mind about speaking up about the situation. I mean, that's not me personally in life, but that's the character, where she would kind of, because she's had an experience, she feels that she's achieved where she has what she has and gotten where she has because she learned to bury that. Somebody younger should possibly take the same route. So I think that as women somewhere, forget about the Me Too movement. I think as women, what we tend to do, the greatest disservice we do each other and other women, is where we decide that our narrative is the only narrative. Like it's me saying that I believe that I'm enjoying single blessedness, and oh God, something is wrong with you that you want to kind of look at, you know, marriage as being the altar of everything in your existence. No, what's true for you need not be true for me. Our tastes, our desires, what makes us tick is so diverse in that sense. So I think that it was all these complexities that drew me to this part. I was just amazed that I was getting this chance because, you know, world over, women after a certain age are written off. And then that's the magic of the OTT platform, because truths need to be told. And there's no alternate to a lived life. You know, certain things from a young body doesn't seem palatable. You need to have gone through that course to be able to say certain things and not say them, to make them believable for people out there. And I think if there's anything that's been communicated, I think it is that lived life of mine. And I'm just so grateful to Alankrita for recognizing that and wanting me for that.
In fact, there are many other interesting strands there. You know, you were talking about your own marriage, where it's not that you blame your partner, but this extreme loneliness of broken synapses, basically, between decent people, you know. And Fatima's story in the series actually plays that out very powerfully, you know, where her husband and she are college sweethearts, and
Yeah.
you can see she's outgrown that person. He doesn't speak to her finesses, you know, and
Absolutely.
and the loneliness that creates. And she strangely uses the phrase you just used. In her character says when she's with her lover, she says, I feel I can breathe again. And again, society looks down on those, that search for the individual, for their own individuality.
A lot of minds have said that, oh, you're glorifying extramarital affairs. Nobody's glorifying anything. Who's to decide what it is that takes you through the night? Who's to decide what keeps you from slashing your wrists? It could be a piece of music that you listen to. It could be finding solace in the arms of a lover. I think that, you know, we're too quick to judge. And I think that somewhere along the line, I'll never forget this beautiful line from The Hours, in fact, the character of Julianne Moore, who leaves her child and walks away from that marriage where she's playing that, you know, that classic American housewife who puts the dinner on the table and vacuums the carpet. And when she's asked later, why did you leave? And she says, well, the choice was death or life. I chose life. And she possibly would have killed herself if she had remained in that situation. So I think that when I look at Daddy, I've often asked my father that you made a film about an alcoholic man who abandons his child, but comes back so many years later and decides to pick up the pieces, and society allows him that. Would it have been permissible if it was a female character, a mother who abandons a child, goes and drowns herself in the bottle or maybe in the arms of another man and then comes back all those years later? They would never give a woman that sanctity or that license. So I think that, they're too quick to judge. And the easiest way you can hit out at a woman is to kind of make her feel small with regards to her choices, her sexual choices. And would it have been okay if it was 5 men that the show was about and they were having multiple relationships? It would have been pretty palatable for most of the people who are going up in arms about the women making their own choices.
So, you said that you would probably now not be able to do a body shoot like you did on the film magazine cover then. So is that, of course, because our societal circumstances are different, or is it because as a person you're different? And when you look back to that, what were you seeing?
I didn't think about it that much. I mean, frankly, I was shooting for Phir Teri Kahani Yaad Aayi, and I remember very clearly I was shooting for this song Tere Dar Par Sanam, one of my favorite songs from the film, and Dinesh Raheja from Movie Magazine along with Jeetu, and I had great regard and respect for both Jeetu and Dinesh. I trusted their judgment. I loved sitting down and doing interviews with them, unlike most of the other people at that time, because I felt that what is the point of an interview if you're not going to really discover something about yourself? It's like I mean, me talking to you right now is like I could well be sitting down with a shrink, because you see me in a certain way and you get me to reveal things about myself. And they showed me this cover of Demi Moore's, which I thought was glorious. I didn't find it remotely vulgar. I thought there was something so beautiful and so kind of pure about it. And they said, would you do this? And I said, yeah. And of course, I mean, she was absolutely truly in her bodysuit, and I had skin colored underwear on. I just didn't think about it that much. It was not done to provoke. It was done on an impulse, which is why I stood by it. And yes, of course, people went up in arms, and then it kind of died down, though it is still one of the most talked about covers. But would I do it today? Well, I don't have the body at 49 that I had at, however old I was then, 26 or however. So I think that you have to be realistic about the way you're looking physically to be able to pull something off that you did then. But also I've done that, so why would I repeat that? But I had no problems in Bombay Begums shooting a lovemaking scene. Of course, it helped tremendously that, there was Rahul Bose, who I trust implicitly. Danish I'd never met before, but Danish I kind of instantly bonded with, so there was trust there as well. And there was trust with regards to the filmmaker. I trusted Alankrita, I trusted Bornida, I trusted what I was doing. And I feel that if you go into anything thinking that, oh my God, I'm doing something controversial, I'm doing something vulgar, I'm doing something I should be ashamed of, it's going to be communicated like that. Intimacy, lovemaking is something that is so pure. And why look at it in any other way? And that's always been my tone and tenor. I was uncomfortable in my career as an actor earlier ever speaking double meaning lines, because I believe that in a country that anyway had a pretty warped idea of sexuality, you can't perpetuate the fact that sex is a bad word, So I said, no, I don't mind kissing somebody if the script demands it, but I'm not going to mouth double meaning lines, and I'm not going to allow you to train your camera on my body or another woman's body where it's meant to look vulgar. One of the greatest complaints about me with Jism 2, where I introduced Sunny Leone, who's an adult film star who's actually been cast in a mainstream film. That's never happened anywhere in the world, not even in America. America, with all their forward thinking, has not permitted their adult entertainers to actually break through into mainstream cinema. I was told, oh, you had Sunny Leone and you humanized her and you made her look kind of, sensual, but you could have really titillated the audience. And I'm like, no, my gaze will not permit me. I cannot look at another woman's body as something vulgar or as a tool to use to titillate men out there. What seems not right to me is not going to be right for you. So that's why when they talk about reforms and about censorship, I have a censor sitting in my head and heart. If it doesn't work for me, I'm not going to present it to you, you know. So yeah, so I believe that it's always the attitude, never the act. You know, your intent gets communicated, and the attitude is what sees you through.
So, there's been this big controversy around Bombay Begums over the child, and the fact that she's 15 or she's 13.
Yeah, yeah.
And
She's 13 going on 14.
Yeah. And she goes to a party where, everyone's taking drugs and she takes drugs, she smokes. So what's your take on that, Pooja? First, in relation to the series, as well as in a broader framework, this constant argument over whether art should be allowed to display the darker sides of life or whether it should be a kind of role model for society. How do you think of that?
See, I believe personally that I do not think that art has an obligation to only be beautiful and to kind of gloss over things. I personally believe that art has a duty to be restorative, to heal. And I think that when you look at children today and you look at teenagers today, uh, there's a lot of pressure on them. Drugs are a reality. Addiction is a reality. They've grown leaps and years ahead of all of us when we were growing up because the internet just changed the world in so many other ways. They're not relying on their parents to be the source. They are just looking it up on Google or whatever other method that they are doing it. Sometimes getting the wrong information, and sometimes it results in disasters. But the point is that Shai's character in Bombay Begums is a troubled teenager. She's mourning the death of her mother. She's uncomfortable with the fact that her father has remarried, and somewhere believes that if she kind of opens up to the character of Rani, somewhere she's being disloyal to her mother's memory. She uses her art as a means of escape. She talks to her dead mother. We haven't shown her as an habitual smoker. She's trying to impress Aisha in that scene where she just grabs that cigarette and takes one drag. In fact, Aisha in her own way reprimands her and says that, I hadn't taken my first drag of a cigarette until I had gone to college. Aisha chooses not to talk down to her, not to give her a lecture standing on the street, but just to say that, hey, I didn't do it, so are you sure you want to be doing this? And the consequence of that is that's viewed by the person who would have given Aisha a house, and she doesn't get that house because she's been irresponsible and allowed a teenager to actually take a drag of a cigarette. So she pays the price for that. That's the way I look at it. But coming to the scene about the drugs, at that point, Shai is in a very emotionally distraught space. Her self-esteem is low. She hates the way she looks. She hates the way her body is. She is confused about the onset of puberty. I think that any woman who at some point has not looked in the mirror and said, I hate the way I look, is lying. We've all felt, even the most beautiful women in the world feel great deal of kind of, low self-esteem. She goes to that party. She's trying to woo this boy who doesn't give her the time of the day. She's heartbroken. And she witnesses these older kids sitting in a corner and doing drugs. And she does something disastrous. She actually imbibes herself. But what is the consequence of that action? Do we then show her breaking into an item song where she's suddenly kind of dancing better than anybody? And does that act then make her then achieve that goal of getting that boy? No, she almost dies in a bathroom, of an OD. She rips her book up. She almost dies. The opening scene after that that sequence is me screeching at the boy's father and saying that what the hell were drugs doing at a 14-year-old's party in the first place? And that man apologizes and says that, I'm sorry, we weren't there. And doesn't that happen so often, Shoma? That parents are not really kind of watching over their kids. They're left to nannies. They're left to watchmen. They're left to drivers to kind of ferry from one place to the other. You put an iPad in your child's hand or an iPhone in your child's hand to compensate for the time that you can't give your child. And do you really know what's going on in your child's heart and head? Very often not. Most people grow up outside their homes for that reason, because parents just don't want to meet them halfway. That scene was important. That scene was important because Shai needed to have almost died for Rani to get jolted, for Rani to realize that, oh my God, not only did she almost die of an OD, she was in a situation where she was wearing this dress and she could have been abused physically. She could have been raped. And that makes Rani kind of face her own demons and then connect with that child from a place of truth. And that actually forms the bridge between the two women. It's when she lets the defenses down and she shares her deepest, most, shameful detail of her life, according to her, is when this young girl looks at her as a human being, relates to her. So according to me, action, reaction. If you don't show a child doing that drug and almost dying from it, how do you give the signal that drugs are not to be messed with?
Like you said, I think the key thing about art is you are meant to put out complex characters, complex circumstances. Otherwise, what would
because
art
it's a
be?
reality. The truth is that the age group is getting younger and younger. I mean, people messing with substances, alcohol, nicotine, drugs. It's a reality world over, and you can't say that it doesn't exist. It does exist. You need to kind of pick up stories which show you the beautiful yet the dark side of life.
So, Pooja, but I wanted to ask you the question because it's been a controversy that's also dogged your life. Is the picture that you and Mahesh did of kissing, and that kind of played out again this summer when all the controversy engulfed Mahesh's life vis-a-vis Sushant Singh and Riya?
Well, look, there are two things that, people try to use as arsenal against me. One is they say, oh, your brother knew David Headley. Yes, my brother knew David Headley, and my brother picked up the phone and reported to the Mumbai police that he knew him and actually gave them great details about Headley's life that possibly they did not have at that point. Who let Headley into the country? Who gave him a visa? It can go on and on. And the fact is that the NIA was involved. That has seen its course, so I'm not going to defend that. The second is, oh, but you kiss your father. My point is, again, that photograph, it was not shot as, oh, we're going to shoot a picture of us kissing each other. We were posing together, and one of those pictures is me kissing him on his forehead, one of his pictures is me kissing him on his cheek, and one of his giving him a peck like this on his lips, like I would when I was 3, like I would when I was 10, like I would when I was 15, and I did when I was 25. Now, you can say, oh my God, but we don't do that. Okay. And if you want to kind of imagine that there's something more to that, speaks more about your mind and heart. So I am not going to get bogged down by the way you view the world. I'm not here to defend anything. I can't choose your opinion. I don't try to dictate your opinion to you. So that's something that, I've kind of gone beyond now. Long back, many years ago.
So I just probably want to end on the other phenomenon, which your family has spoken about it, but it is the mental health is something that is so pervasive, and India is really, really grappling with mental health. So Shaheen recently came out with her, her experience of depression. But what was it like for you as a sister? What was that experience of having a sibling with depression?
Well, I think Shaheen is a very courageous girl to be able to kind of, put into words all that she has felt and experienced in cold print. Talking about something, but actually putting it on paper and putting it out there are two different realities, and you know that more than anybody else. It's the need of the hour, more so post-COVID. It was the need of the hour then as well, because I think India is in a infantile state with regards to anything to do with mental health. We kind of write it off as a rich man's predicament. We just do not want to see that there is something that we don't quite understand and cannot just be fixed by you saying, hey, I'll have a meal and you'll get okay. Eat a piece of chocolate, you'll be okay. Go on a holiday, you'll be okay. And last year was not easy. Even though I did not know Sushant Singh Rajput personally, I think that it was tragic what happened. And the consequences of that, as we all know, became a media frenzy. It became a feeding frenzy. And it was not easy for me to see people hurl the kind of abuse and death threats at my family. And for me at that point, it would have been very simple to speak up and hit back, but I chose not to. Not because of weakness, because I felt that eventually lies and ignorance dies its course. I think that what's tragic is that post that there was a fine actor, a fine human being called Asif Basra, who hung himself, and his body was found in his flat. Not one person spoke about that. Why? Because it was not something that they could harness for their own ratings or for their own profit. Nameless, faceless people are killing themselves daily in this country. Nameless, faceless people, thousands of them, are kind of suffering depression, do not have any access to help, can't even speak to their very own about it, don't even know that there is help available. And I think we need to address that.
I'm sure for everyone it's going to be very interesting, because people might imagine that there were fractures in your life from your childhood and the fact that it was unconventional or the missing parent, but you've actually put all that on the table. But how did that express itself in the dynamic between you sisters, the younger you? And of course, now it's quite evident that all three of your friends. But if you were to explore that younger dynamic and negotiation, was it a difficult relationship between you and Shaheen?
No,
you and Alia?
not at all, not at all. Shaheen has always, I'll never forget the day my mother woke me up and told me that you have a sister. The first person my father called when Shaheen was born was my mother. And it was the afternoon, I was having a snooze and she called me up and she said, you have a sister now. And I was so proud. So when I sat there at her book release and I looked at her and I said, she's an author now. And again, achieved this major milestone by what? Putting her frailties on the table. So it just teaches me yet again that, what the world tells you to hide away and lock away into a corner of your heart is actually what defines who you are in many ways. And I think that it frees you when you come out with your frailties and share them and air them and hold them up to the sun. Because not only does it free you, somewhere it kind of might resonate with somebody out there who's going through the same thing. And there are a lot of people who are going through the same thing. So when I talk about my alcoholism, or Shaheen talks about her battle with depression, the idea is not to presume that you're some role model. The idea is to say that, hey, here are my frailties. This is my brokenness. This is how I've mended myself. I mean, the Japanese have a beautiful term for it, where they take broken porcelain and they put gold into it to remind you where it was broken, because it becomes stronger then. And if my frailties can become your strengths, then it's a life worth lived.
So much of what you just said, Pooja, makes so much sense in a wider context as well, because as parents are grappling with complex worlds that their children inhabit, the one guardrail we can all use is honesty. The truth sets you free, and respect. I think those are the two really big themes that has been there right through everything you're saying. So I just want to end now, Pooja, with your perspective on the way women are trying to articulate themselves, just in women trying to find that equilibrium of how they want to negotiate the world. What is your perspective on it?
Well, I think that these are exciting times. First of all, Shoma, I think that, while I believe strongly that a show like Bombay Begums kind of somewhere it widens the bars. Let's not fool ourselves that we are really free. I think all of us are chained to our own masters in that sense, whether it is our inherent patriarchy that we actually carry forward more than the men in our lives do, whether it is our biases, whether it is the fact that we somehow want to thrust on another woman our narrative. And I think that what's good for me is not good for you. And I think that we need to be able to celebrate our differences. And that's why what I love about Bombay Begums is that not only there was a chance to come together with co-actors who were so disparate in that sense, but also their stories were so different from the others. But I think that the more women that you have at the helm of things, the more decision makers that there are, the more people who greenlight stories, the more people who actually, writing your story is one thing, being able to greenlight it and get the money to tell it is quite another. The time has come more than ever to sit across and listen to contrasting views and opinions. If there's something that you hate about me, I would rather sit down and understand where that hate is coming from. Is it ignorance? Is it something that you've been fed? Is it something that you've been paid to kind of believe? And I feel that if you meet people in a place of humanity, then a lot of walls come down, you know. It's too easy for me to have a knee-jerk response to somebody who might kind of hurl some abuse at me and, you know, abuse them right back. But how does that make me any different? I think that I have locked myself in cages far often than anybody else has locked me into a cage. It took me a long time to realize that the cage was actually locked from the inside. So I think that let's meet each other with understanding, and let's not have this us against them kind of mentality, because then we just widen the gap. We need to understand that institutes are finally run by people. And yes, every person has their own set of biases and their own way of looking at the world. But I think that my only plea to people who are decision makers is that these are not times to strangulate voices. You know, we need to be able to allow voices to kind of emerge. That might be in contradiction to your worldview, because that is the way the world is. I think the time has come for us to relearn, to unlearn, to rethink. And if I can't change my opinion, then how have I evolved?
That's a great note to end on. In fact, it's running like a strand through everything you've said. It's something that I often feel or try and communicate when I speak with people, is that it's not just about changing the location of power, but changing the nature of power altogether.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know why I was reminded of this great line that my grandmother had told me long back. She said, "Beta, kamre badalne se bukhar nahi jati." Which also tells me that there's so many people within the industry who are decision makers, who might have gone from a traditional TV job to now an OTT platform. It doesn't mean that they're suddenly more evolved because of the company that they're representing. Which is why I feel Netflix stands tall, and it's not a plug, and heads and shoulders above a lot of people out there, because they're not mere platforms, they're collaborators. They have tuned in to a heartland of people across board. And if you look at women, and if you look at the representation on the channel, I mean, you have so many shades of women. They're evil, they're pure, they're kind of, sensual. It's across board, because there are so many women within one woman. I mean, you are so many things, I am so many things, and then we decide what we allow to emerge and not allow to emerge, depending on who's sitting in front of us, really, and who permits us to be ourselves. So I think it's exciting times. The fact that, the show gets consumed by 190 countries simultaneously is such a huge departure from when I started out in films, or when my father did in 1974. For a cinema to be able to kind of show Tamanna in 97, Metro Cinema had 1,500 capacity. I mean, we couldn't run for 4 shows. Then the multiplexes came in. And then they decided that timings hum ye aapko denge, because it was largely a bunch of men who decided that this will sell more than that. And then you would find odd timings for the so-called sensitive artistic films. And now there are these platforms. So it's just changed the game. So if we don't catch up, if we don't change the conversations that we have with each other in private, how are the conversations in the public sphere going to change? I think that there is nothing more empowering than being able to sing your own song, your way.
So thank you very, very much, Pooja. It's been
Thank you. Thank you.